Welcome back to Empires of the Future. My name is Jackson. I'm here with my friend Denton. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I've kind of had my sweatshirt on and off and on and off today. Very cold outside, but when you're milling around inside, the boiler at First Southern does an amazing job. And so, man, it keeps that whole building nice and toasty. So I'm coming in, going out, doing this and that, sweatshirt on, sweatshirt off. And right now, I am roasting in this room.
Good. I am wearing 4 layers and feel completely fine.
Wow.
And so what we've proven here, folks, is that the human body has various desired temperatures, for sure.
Yeah. I guess I'm going through menopause or something, having these hot flashes.
It's probably true.
Yeah, I'm sure that's it. But I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. As I've mentioned, I'm sure more than once on the podcast and more than 100 times to you, I don't like cold, and we have experienced, I can't remember when it's been as cold as it has been the last week or so. Mm-hmm. The low of 1, I think, yesterday, and maybe the day before as well. And so today it's been like 9 degrees all day, and so that's rough, and I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy it at all.
It is.
But
for all my, there's a guy that goes to our church that's training for a marathon, and I asked him about it on Sunday. I was like, "So, what's your running schedule going to look like this week?" And he said, "Cold." I said, "Yeah, I guess so." But it's my understanding that he still, even in these cold temperatures, gets out and does most of his training outside, which is really impressive. I think getting up and running in the morning consistently and getting up to those long distances is already really impressive, but to do it when it is 1 to 9 degrees out, 9 degrees has been kind of warmer than it was the past couple of days as far as early in the morning. So it felt balmy this morning.
Did it,
at 9 degrees.
Did it? Yeah. And I'd say you and I have run at least 2 or 3 of the places in town where you could run inside, and running 17 laps around a track just to get to a mile is not really an option. And it used to be at the old YMCA downtown, not only were there some larger tracks, there were multiple tracks at that building, and we just don't have that option now. The new Ys have smaller tracks, and most of it used for walking, and so it's just, if you want to run people over, they're reasonable tracks to run around. But
that old track down at the old YMCA was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It had like 6 lanes. Yeah, I mean, it was set up like a competitive running track. Yeah. And I think it was big enough that, what was it, 11 laps was a mile,
something like that. And even they were banked, like
banked
in the corners. It was banked, which makes a huge difference. It just wears out your feet to be on a flat track, short, trying to turn all those corners.
Your knees. Yeah. Oh yeah. Hate it. That whole gym was really cool. I mean, it's really old, really neat looking.
Well, and it's still there. I guess we can hope and pray that there's been talk of making it into affordable housing, repurposing. I mean, I think what they're running into is you'd have to tear down parts of it. I mean, they got out of it because the roof had leaks, and it's the original Central High School of Evansville, and so it's a building with a lot of age to it. But man, such a cool building. Every time I would go to a different place, I mean, they had that cycling studio that was on like the 5th floor somehow. They had, I mean, we're not even talking about
You're like climbing ladders to get to this room.
You don't think there can possibly be a cycling studio up there. You're doubting the workers who told you it was up there. Yeah. Like in this lost tower, there's a cycling studio, and you get up there and like, no, there is. Who possibly carried these 30 stationary bikes up all those stairs?
Oh, yeah.
And right off of that was that 3-story gym that had the basketball court, and then 1 level, I think they used that for a walking track, and then a 3rd level, which was like where they did another running track. Yeah. It was an amazing
cool building.
Still amazing. I hope they can find some use
under every
for it.
Stairwell. There was a workout room or some sort of equipment, something you could do in there. It was awesome. Yeah, very cool. But so it's cold, but here we are. We're excited to be here and to be going to talk about an amazing topic today. Big fan. What are we talking about today, Jackson?
Yes. So you brought up you brought it up again a few weeks ago, but we talked about months ago, books that we knew we wanted to make sure and talk about on the podcast. And Pilgrim's Progress was at the top of your list. Yeah. And needless to say, it is a Christian classic. It has been, other than the Bible, the highest selling book in kind of like the English language at various times. And so without a doubt, worth talking about. And we have such a record on books. Some books we have taken, 11 episodes to get through?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think Mere Christianity, we took a long time. I think also Strange New World
yes.
by Carl Trueman. We spent several episodes on that.
Yeah, and for anyone who might go, well, what does it reflect on the quality of the book if you manage to get through a book in one episode? No, we've just changed our strategy because we just didn't think it was terribly practical to try to throw 11 episodes or 7 episodes even at each book. And so we've challenged ourselves to go ahead and try to get them down to 1 to 2 episodes. And even I would say where we are today is we hope to get this in one episode, but hey, we'll see.
Yeah.
Because the quality of this book, we were just talking about before we started, the quality of this book is very difficult to estimate. It is a book of such depth that you're not going to read it and really understand it in 1 to 3 readings. And in fact, the book is of such quality that it helps you to think through the entire Christian life. And so my advice to start would be, anyone who enjoys this book, read it as many times as you feel like you ought to read it. It is worth it.
Yeah. And I tell you another thing about it, even as we were talking, as we've been sort of talking about it, there's so much happening in the book. There's interplay between individuals. There's places and cities that Christian goes to. There's so much happening in the book that the kind of interactions, the moments in the book that you really seem to like latch onto a little bit more, or they stuck out to you a little bit more, or are very different than the moments for me that I have mentioned. I mean, not that they weren't important to me or that mine weren't good in your eyes, but there's like you said, such a breadth of different moments and scenes representative of the Christian life that I think are so applicable and so helpful, and so that you can read it and you might read it and think, oh, I can't believe that in their podcast they didn't talk about this moment in the book. That if you've read Pilgrim's Progress, if you have appreciation for it, or if you go read it, you might say that. You might say, boy, they really missed it when they didn't talk about this thing or that thing. And we accept that, but hopefully this does encourage you to go and read it and be encouraged by it, because it's an encouraging book, helpful book for the Christian. Allegory, very explicit allegory. A lot of people don't like that it is so explicit. You can see even in his names of places and people, like names like Christian, like in and of itself. You see names like faithful, hopeful. You see pliable and obstinate and worldly wise man and all these different names. So it is pretty, in a sense, clear and easy to understand most of the time who he's talking about, what he's talking about. But there are some moments where it's like, I feel like this was a product of his time and I didn't really pick up on what he was talking about there.
Yes. And so that's a great segue into, I read this book and really kind of tried to take time through it back in a discipleship class in seminary. And if I can manage, what I want to do with every book I read is to make an outline of it. So thankfully I did do that at that time. And part of the outline that I made was included in the version that I read was a short biography of John Bunyan himself, which is helpful because, as you say, certain elements of this are going to show that he was a man who lived at a certain time. And John Bunyan lived from 1628 to 1688, and so he lived 60 years. He was the son of a brazier, which means he worked with brass and worked with hot coals, or at least he was around his father working with those, so he comes from a working-class background there in the 1600s. He was drafted into the British Civil War and saw struggle. He lost his first wife and ended up then marrying Elizabeth, his second wife. But then at that time, he went through a severe crisis in his faith. And when you think about a man who, even on his face, experienced what he had experienced, to go through a war. And a civil war is a particularly difficult kind of war. You are fighting people that in the past you would have called compatriots or friends or neighbors, and then to lose a wife. So his heart had been rent in a few different ways, and so it should not be a surprise that he suffered a severe religious crisis, even after marrying again, and endured that. And in 1653, he joined a nonconformist church there in England. And if you're in England in the 1600s, you're going to be in a time when Protestantism is on the rise across Europe and England itself. There is not a clean story. There is a certain Protestant kings and queens, and then certain Catholic kings and queens, and wars resulting from that. And if you are American and listening to this, as I assume most people are, then you like to arrive really quickly at, well, when are we going to get to freedom of religion? Oh, the answer is it's going to take quite a long time. So that if you are at a nonconformist church, that means it is not sanctioned by the government. You were neither Catholic nor any sort of approved Protestant. Yeah. And so that meant he struggled there. He ended up writing against the Quakers, who were another nonconforming group. And this book is called Some Gospel Truths Opened. He preaches in the fields around the area that he lived there in England, and wrote a book called Grace Abounding, which is an autobiography where he just writes that I found grace for me.
Yeah. I think I don't know if it was added later or I don't know, but I think the full title, you'll oftentimes find it as Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners.
Sure.
Right. I think that's a good title for an autobiography. I think it speaks to his task and or his goals in writing that autobiography and stuff like that. Also a great book. Yeah. Yeah.
And so one of the things that happens with Bunyan is his most famous work is by far and away Pilgrim's Progress. But he was a writer. He wrote his whole life, basically. He then wrote the Pilgrim's Progress, we believe, while in prison. And same challenges. Again, if you experience freedom of religion, thank God for that, because he was in prison related to preaching without a license, being involved in various religious movements that were not sanctioned, and doing things like saying before a judge, you may want me to change what I am doing in the name of Christ. I'm not going to do that, which will get you thrown in prison in this time.
Yeah.
And so then eventually became pastor of the Bedford Church. Also wrote in 1680, The Life and Death of Mr. Badman. I like, thinking about how certain titles do transfer directly to today. And then a book called The Holy War in 1682. And he, on this book here, if anybody reads it and thinks it was long, he says in the beginning of this book, I initially set out to write a shorter book. But as he thought about his life and what he had learned and the other Christians around him and what he had seen them struggle with, he noticed patterns. And as he noticed these patterns, what seemed to come to him is the idea of kind of putting those patterns into a form. And in terms of one just kind of interesting note about this book, that I've read other authors do this, in particular a fellow named it's not Koji Kondo, Shigeru Miyamoto, people who made Zelda, The Legend of Zelda, the maps in Zelda, the maps in Pokemon, the maps in a lot of people's favorite games. Well, that's Japan. Like, it's a place where that guy who was a kid grew up in Japan, and he found the area where he grew up beautiful and magical to a degree. Well, Bunyan did the same thing. It's the cliffs and the hills of England is, it seems, what inspired a lot of his, backdrop where Christian is going to walk through. And that's powerful to think about too, that if you don't think of the place where you grew up as having beauty to it, well, then go back there and look around, because it probably does. If you grew up in a city, maybe we may be talking about parks, but he's going to think carefully about everything that he saw, and I think that makes it a powerful work.
Yeah. He talked about, at one point in the book, he talked about a spire And I remember having to be like, "What's a spire?"
Sure.
You know, and if you don't know, a spire is like a staircase or a means to get over a fence or a wall. So access kind of from one field to another, but such that any livestock that are in there aren't going to be able to traverse it, right, and get over it.
Yeah,
That's a spire.
and probably that's something that we should say too. There are various versions of the Pilgrim's Progress because his English, his version of English, if you read it in his original English, it will be worth it, but it's a challenge. And so there are various versions, all the way down to what is the version that's sitting in front of you right now, Denton?
Oh, Jackson brought in no, not comic book, graphic novel.
Okay, sure.
Version of the Pilgrim's Progress, and I've never seen this before, and this is fascinating. And it presents it in, whenever it was written, probably the 90s. 92. It's kind of portrayed in a modern sense, with modern clothes and technologies and things like that. And also, it looks like it's got both Pilgrim's Progress and the second part of Pilgrim's Progress, which is about his wife's journey to the celestial city, which is cool. So, but yeah, it's a really neat thing. Actually, I was flipping through it just a second ago and looking at like how they portray like the giant despair, Apollyon. Boy, they make him look really menacing. All kinds of cool stuff. So, big fan. This was neat. Yeah, and you can find it in like you said, in different formats. There's actually 3 or 4 different children's versions of the Pilgrim's Progress, which are really valuable and good to read to your children. The one that I read, and it was the one I was just introduced to, but I am glad. I believe it is in original language as he wrote it, but I like it because you can get it for free on Desiring God on their website. You can download the PDF of it. You can also order it off of Amazon or whatever. It's the Desiring God version. But also, there are some versions, and I don't know if you know this, there are some versions that take out the poetic portions. Like there's portions of the book that are in verse, and there's some versions that omit those. They take them out, which is really dumb to me. Like I don't understand why you would take those out. Those are some of the best lines in the book, in my opinion. And so the fact that you would take those out is really frustrating to me. So if you are looking to go and find the book, try and find one that has the poetry in it. Yeah. A quick test is if you flip to the part where Christian goes to the cross, there is a poem that concludes that section. If there's no poem there, then find a different copy and read that. Yeah, that's my opinion. But yeah, great book. In whatever format you pick it up in, I think you're going to be blessed by it.
I agree. So then we don't intend to cover every section, and especially not every character in the book because there is such depth to it. And so we want to hit some high points. But tell me your first high point then, Denton.
I think the opening scenes with Christian and his when he comes to the reality of his sin, of his guilt, as he's reading the scripture, and he's confronted with the reality of, I have this problem, I have this great burden, and I don't know what to do about it, and he's sort of brought to despair, and the scene is it's in the first few pages of the book. You find this man just brought to his knees weeping when he recognizes the reality of his sin and the consequences that are due him, and is left wondering, what do I do? Where do I turn from here? And lo and behold, a character by the name of Evangelist shows up and points him to the road to the celestial city, and directs him along the way. And that first for me was a pretty dramatic scene and a great way to start the book. Yeah, of this man who's brought to the end of himself, and there's some sadness with it too. I mean, he goes and he tells his family, as they're living here in the city of destruction. He goes and tells his family about what's happened to him, the realization he's come to, what he needs to do, and they just absolutely, they reject it.
Yeah.
His family, his neighbors, they all think that he's crazy, and he has no choice but to leave and go on this journey, this pilgrimage alone without his family, which is tough.
Right.
Which is tough, and it does speak to the reality that is true, unfortunately, in this day and age we live in, where we might come to faith in Christ, and our loved ones, even a loved one such as a spouse, doesn't believe,
Right.
and it can really be difficult to say, well, whether or not you believe, I'm charging forward on this journey, and it's not a call to leave your spouse if you become a believer. The Bible's pretty clear on that so long as they're willing to remain with you, remain with them.
Right.
But to not have your spouse on that spiritual journey with you, that can be tough.
Yeah, and it seems especially to me to not use an unbelieving spouse as an excuse
Yeah.
to not follow the Lord yourself.
Yeah. That's a good
ask
point.
the hard questions yourself. And I think that's exactly where Jesus is going when he says, that some will have to leave husbands, wives, sons, daughters, but they gain the kingdom and they gain family in the kingdom.
Right.
And that one of the harder sets of passages in the Gospels when Jesus is saying these sorts of things. And so, yeah, without a doubt, Christian and the city of destruction and all that, I in particular in that section, I have never, certain words I learned from this book.
Right.
And it's similar to when you first read the Bible, you have to learn the words, but when you learn the words, you go, oh, I've noticed that tendency in myself and in others around me. And so obstinate and pliable have been with me in terms of tendencies to watch out for in myself and others ever since I read this book. And obstinate means I won't go along with anything. Mm-hmm. And pliable means I go along with everything.
Yep.
And in the book, obviously, pliable joins Christian for a time, but then when hardship comes, pliable goes somewhere else because pliable was eager to join, but pliable tends to join every new thing. But meanwhile, obstinate, there's a certain lie that goes like this. Well, I'm cautious, so I don't join with any team. It's like, okay, that's not caution, my friend.
Yeah.
You are so attached to not looking stupid that you cannot possibly be seen as off balance. You just have to be the guy who is always right, always on target, who can't be seen to be a joiner. Yeah. And God knows better. But obstinate and pliable certainly always be with us.
Yeah, for sure. I think, without a doubt, the moment when Christian comes to the cross.
Yeah.
Beautiful moment. It's pretty early on in the book, which makes sense because as Christians, this is one of the first things that we come to is the cross of Jesus Christ, and it's at that place where this great burden, this pack that he had on his back, that it was freed, it broke loose, and I can't help but we've got to just read certain sections. Whenever Christian comes to the cross, that's a really short section. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is one of those moments where if you miss the poetry, I think you're missing something. This is the song that Christian sings. So it says, "Then Christian gave 3 leaps for joy." This is right after his burden fell off his back and rolled into the empty tomb. He says, "Then Christian gave 3 leaps for joy and went on singing, 'Thus far I did come laden with my sin, nor could aught ease the grief that I was in. Till I came hither, what a place is this? Must here be the beginning of my bliss? Must here the burden fall from my back? Must here the strings that bound it to me crack? Blessed cross, blessed sepulchre, blessed rather be the man that there was put to shame for me." And what a beautiful poem. It's like, well, we should sing that. We should turn that into a song and sing it. Actually, someone probably has. I don't know. But yeah, I just, it's a beautiful, beautiful moment that as a Christian we can so many of us can relate to of feeling the weight lifted of the burden of sin that we carry with us. This burden that so weighed him down and that caused him so much anguish at the beginning of the story is now gone.
Right.
It's been removed.
This interestingly enough, is particularly powerful in this comic book because, for instance, you see him carrying this. He takes up this pack when he leaves his house. And you see him carrying this through the Slough of Despond as he's trying to get through this swamp. And you're looking at this going like, you've got a big old pack on your back trying to swim through a swamp, man. Like, and he keeps on having it on. He keeps on having it on. And so it is a moment in that book when you see the weight come off of him.
Yeah.
Now, before that, for me, the encounter with the interpreter was really powerful. In the interpreter's house, who he meets the interpreter after the wicket gate, and in the first room, he deals with law and gospel. And as a Christian, you will begin to think about, what is the law for?
Mm-hmm.
What recourse do I have if I can't live up to the standards of the law? I have tried to live up to the standards of the law. I am discouraged because the law seems to be a crushing weight on my shoulders. And the answer is the gospel, that you will not stand before the law. The law is too heavy for you, but thankfully one has fulfilled the law for you. And so the whole first room of the interpreter with law and gospel. The second room about passion and patience is powerful. The third room, Christ and the oil of grace versus the devil and the water to quench. The fourth room, the valiant man in the palace. The fifth room in particular, the man of despair trapped in the cage. The way, and this is all fresh in my mind because I went through the comic yesterday, and the man of despair in the comic is the scholar who, it says, built his own cage. His beliefs have made a cage for him, and he is trapped believing his own story about how everything works. He can't possibly see around his own perceptions, and he is in despair. He hates the world that he sees. He hates that he doesn't know what to do about it, but he's trapped. And this is a story of many academics who are able to build an ivory tower in a university setting and begin to believe things like, well, if only other people would see the world the way I do, then all the problems would be solved. That there is a danger in being that kind of build. And yes, there is a danger in every kind of build. That's one of the reasons why this book is so powerful, is it makes you see a journey that a Christian must walk, no matter what kind of Christian you are. The sixth room, the dreaming man, the wheat and the tares. And so I just thought the House of the Interpreter had some really powerful ideas that it was pointing to. And so, yeah, and then leading right to the cross right after that, where he loses his burdens.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is what I'm getting at when I say, like, there's different things that jump out at different people.
Yes.
The Home of the Interpreter was one of those things that just didn't really, like, grab me really all that much throughout the book. And now, maybe a part of it was because there were some things in it that I was like, okay, what exactly is he getting at here? And it's a lot to sift through, but yeah, for you, that was one of the kind of big things, right?
Yeah, and I would say elements of it. I think that one thing that's challenging about this book is if but John Bunyan were alive today and we could sit down with him and say, tell us some more about what you had in mind here and there and here and there, yeah. I would be riveted to do it because he lived an interesting life. He had depth of understanding, and so I'm not. We know by the words what he was pointing at, but exactly what he was after in everything, I don't think we can know in every detail. Yeah. And obviously he had a lot to say about right. in the House of the Interpreter and all of this.
Yeah. For me, another point that was maybe the high point of the book for me.
Yeah.
Was the martyrdom of faithful.
Yeah.
At Vanity Fair.
Yeah. You get taken off guard in moments when you're like, okay, this is a Christian. I'm just following this person who's a Christian. And then another character comes in and you're like, wait, this character is going to walk with Christian, what's going to happen here?
Yeah, which that first of all is encouraging that he has companions along the way.
Right.
Many times we can think of our Christian life as something we do solely, something we do alone. But we see depicted in Pilgrim's Progress this truth that we don't do it alone. The Lord is gracious, and He gives us companions along the way, and Faithful is a great companion. And there's first of all this scene I'm kind of, I guess, naming too. Sorry. There's this scene where Faithful is talking with, I think his name's Talkative, I think is who he's talking to. This guy who talks a big talk and can say all kinds of things and likes to, fit in with whoever he's talking to. Yeah. The dude's a talker, right? But Faithful sort of sees through his facade of the ability to talk and cuts to the heart of the matter with this guy, and pretty clearly and helpfully shows within this guy's life, like, where he's misunderstanding the gospel. When he asks the dude, like, where is your hope? Essentially, paraphrasing. The guy's hope was not found in Christ alone. He did not mention the cross or the sepulcher. He did not mention the promises of God, but he mentioned more things that are related to morality, or what is good, or what is right, or how he feels. He had all kinds of things that just were easy to talk about and say, but really missed the heart of the matter for a believer, and how we can have hope. But ultimately, they come to this place, Vanity Fair, and in Vanity Fair, there's as Christian and Faithful are walking through this place, there's all kinds of pretty things to distract them, of items of value and all these kinds of things. There's performers. There's all of this worldly entertainment, these worldly distractions that they are walking through. It's a very worldly city. I mean, it's called Vanity Fair, right? Very worldly place, and they stick out like sore thumbs. They stick out because of how they dress, because of how they talk, and because they refuse to partake in the festivities and in the sales of various things in order to distract them. Yeah. And because they are this way, they ultimately are dragged before a court, and a court filled with jurists. The jurists' names are things like Mr. No Good, Mr. Malice, Mr. Lovelust, Mr. Live Loose, Mr. Heady, Mr. High Mind, Mr. Enmity, Mr. Liar, Mr. Cruelty, Mr. Hate Light, Mr. Implacable. This is the jury that he now faces in Vanity Fair. They face together, Christian and Faithful. And there's this moment where Faithful stands up, and his name is apt, right? He stands up and just boldly proclaims the gospel before this jury. And according to their law, the laws of Vanity Fair, which they had broken by not participating, by not celebrating, by not partaking in what the rest of the people were doing, what the world was doing, by their laws, he had to be killed. And so they took him and they executed him, they killed him. Yeah. And it's a beautiful scene where a chariot comes and takes Faithful to the celestial city. Kind of, it talks about it in something like a shortcut almost. Let's see here. I want to read it for you real quick. It says, I'm not going to be able to find it. Oh, yeah. He was taken up into it, that is the chariot, and straightway was carried up through the clouds with sound of trumpet, the nearest way to the celestial gate. Right? And then it goes to Christian. But as for Christian, he had some respite and was remanded back to prison. And ultimately he escapes, and he sings this song. This is another song that he sang. Well, Faithful, thou hast faithfully professed unto thy Lord, with whom thou shalt be blessed, when faithless ones with all their vain delights are crying out under their hellish plights. Sing, Faithful, sing, and let thy name survive, for though they killed thee, thou art yet alive. A really cool, touching moment when Faithful is martyred and is taken to the celestial city, the nearest way, he says, to the celestial city, where this reality of when believers die, right, when we are die for whatever reason, die young or persecuted, killed, martyred. It's like Paul says, to be absent from the flesh is to be at home with the Lord.
Mm.
So, that was a really good moment for me. I mean, it's a sad moment, but powerful moment.
Yeah.
When faithful is martyred. And you see something good come out of that too. It's not just, he preached the gospel and then he was martyred and then Christian leaves. No, actually Christian's new companion, which shows up right after this scene, he is met with another companion who begins to walk with him, as a fellow by the name of Hopeful. And Hopeful believed and joined Christian on the way because of Faithful's preaching.
Right.
Because of as he was being martyred, as he stood and he preached, his preaching saved the life of Hopeful, who heard the message and believed, and then began to follow Christian,
right,
and becomes a great companion.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
Yeah. What about you? What's another moment for you?
There are some things in between. I will probably go to one that I think is a pretty powerful section for everyone, and that is Doubting Castle.
Yep.
Where he faces the giant Despair.
Yeah.
And so Doubting Castle is to represent what are we to do with doubt.
Yeah.
And then Despair, which is hopelessness. Despair, this giant, tells him that no one ever escapes from this castle of doubt. And the challenge of, well, what if I will never escape, and how could I ever overcome this giant despair, is just a part of the challenge in the Christian life. Is there's a temptation at so many moments to go, I think I'm the only one who feels this way.
Mm-hmm.
And then conversely, the power of a book like this is to help continue to land you in various places to make you go, yeah, what if you're not the only one at all?
Right.
And if you just get the guts to start talking about what you actually think about things, what if there's a way through it? And so this is just a really powerful section about Doubting Castle and the giant despair.
Yeah. And do you remember how they kind of got there to Doubting Castle?
Mm-mm.
So it started, and this is where the term spire comes in. They actually left the path they were supposed to be walking on. They were told to walk on this path, and he says, well, look, there's a much nicer path right over this wall, this fence. Let us go over this spire and walk over there. It's much nicer, much more delightful. We can walk along the stream, and this is Christian encouraging, hopeful, right? Let's go do this. Even Christian, who's the main character, he's the protagonist in the book. He makes a mistake here, and though Hopeful kind of knew, I don't think this is right. Being a younger Christian, he went along with it, right? And they ultimately found themselves on the grounds of the giant despair, and he put him in his dungeon, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole, like, so they got there, right, because they failed to walk in the way they were supposed to walk. They left the path, right? But even in that, the Lord was merciful, because in that moment, I agree, that's a really powerful moment where Christian literally comes to the point where giant despair has told them, tonight you might as well kill yourselves, because when I come in tomorrow, if you're not dead already, I'm going to kill you. Mm-hmm. And Christian finds himself literally saying, why should we not just go ahead and kill ourselves? And he's brought that low. He's brought to that point. And Hopeful throughout the whole thing, God bless Hopeful, is encouraging him. No, think of where the Lord has of how the Lord has been faithful to you. You battled Apollyon. You climbed the hill of difficulty. You made it through the slough of despond. Like, how could you say that, how can you despair now? The Lord has been so good and so faithful to you.
Right. And that moment that you're talking about, I hate now to let that pass. Right before they went through the wicket gate, the flaming arrows of the devils, of darkness, they escaped just barely, and so that was a powerful moment as well. But now Hopeful's bringing that up.
Yeah, he brings it back up to say, think of how God has been so faithful to you, which is a good thing to do as believers. But it ultimately, they are able to escape the dungeon of the giant despair because of a key that Pilgrim has that is noted near the beginning of the book, and it's mentioned a couple times, but hadn't been mentioned in a while. And he forgot about it. Mm-hmm. Well, this key that he has represents the promises of God, and the promises of God made to his people, to believers. And he says, "Oh, wait a minute! I can't believe it! I forgot I have this key. I wonder if this key would work." And he pulls it out, and this key proceeds to unlock all of the doors so that they can escape Doubting Castle and the giant despair. And that also is, great encouragement of how important God's promises are to us, to remember them, to meditate on them, to keep them close. For they do help us in those moments when despair strikes and when doubt creeps in. The promises of God are integral to the believer.
Yeah.
Really good moment. I think, gosh, there's so much that we could say, and part of what we're doing is sort of just hitting the high points, right?
Yeah, and I can say I only have one more myself off the top of my head, and that is the Dark River. They pass through the Delectable Mountains after Doubting Castle, and Dark River is the last stage before the Celestial City, and again this visual imagery is so powerful.
Yeah, let me see that thing. I want to see it now that you're saying it.
Because to look at these two characters pass through the Dark River, and in that book as well, part 2 is in there where Christiana, his wife, and their children also go on a journey. And Christiana has to leave her children in the care of another before she passes through the Dark River, because, of course, the Dark River represents death.
Yeah.
And that we must pass through the Dark River before we reach the Celestial City. And they talk in there about how just take courage when you pass through the Dark River. That everyone must pass through it on their way to the Celestial City. And, it reminded me, for instance, just last year, Tim Keller died. And I was reading about when he lay in his hospital bed, and he told his wife and he told his children, some of his last words. It's okay. This is okay.
Yeah. I
can let go. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be wise if all of us could pray. Then the moments when we face those last moments, if we are able then to say to those around us, I love you, but this is okay. And that we would still then be in our right mind enough to care for those others around us.
Yeah.
To love them in our final moments. And what a testimony.
Yeah.
To be able to have the courage to face that time when it comes for each of us.
Mm-hmm.
I can say this, having grown up outside of the church, the category of courage seemed inadequate to face death. I would not have thought that one could have enough courage to face death. But it's a powerful thing when you read a book that says, well, how do you know?
Yeah.
Why don't you ask
and
see if you might be able to get that level of courage?
Yeah. And I think what also is encouraging in that scene, it's interesting. I think what John Bunyan is trying to portray, because in the scene we see Hopeful, who crosses over the river with very little problem. He just has very little issue getting across that river. Mm-hmm. Christian struggles though, and he begins to sink, and he begins to drown. He begins to cry out, and it's a scary and terrible moment for him. It is not a pleasant experience at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that moment he had a great sense of dread and fear and worry even, about getting through and getting ultimately to the Celestial City. I think he thought he was going to fall short there at the end. But what you see in that is that Because ultimately they both make it through. The angels come, they pull them through, and they make their way through the river and to the celestial gate. And what you see in that, and I think should be an encouragement to us, is that there will be some who, like Tim Keller, face death in a way that is graceful, in a way that shows great courage. But I think for other people, death will be a very scary thing.
Yep.
And the prospect of death, because, death happens and greets people in so many different ways, right? And there are some, even of God's people, who, though they know the truth, though they know that death has no victory, it has no sting, and that ultimately death will give way to life for us, it can still be a moment of great dread and great fear. But even in those, God is faithful.
Yeah.
God is faithful to those who in death are met with fear and anxiety and worry and even perhaps a hint of doubt that they might not make it, right? What an encouragement it is to know that God's faithfulness for his people extends beyond even that. Yeah. I heard the story one time told, and I think it applies similarly. Who was it? D.A. Carson, I think, that told a story of two Hebrew men in Egypt. Think about these two Hebrew men in Egypt who, on the night before they were to leave, on the night of the Passover, they have received their commands. They know what they're supposed to do. They know they're supposed to sacrifice the lamb. They're supposed to smear the blood on the doorpost and on the lintel of their house, and that so long as their doors are marked, the angel of death will pass over, and they will not be touched. Right? Imagine there were two Hebrew men who both received the instructions, abided by them, and now we're waiting. And one says to the other, "I am so excited to see how the Lord is going to move, and that we're about to leave this place. That He has promised us that if we do these things, that if we obey Him, if we hear His voice, then we will be brought safely through because of the blood of the Lamb that is spread on the Lord. By this, the blood of the Lamb, it will be brought through. I'm so excited. I can't wait till we leave." And the other one says, "I'm really nervous. I know that the Lord said that, and I've done it. But also, I'm terrified that the angel of death is going to come by and something is going to happen." You know, the question he asked was, with those two men, which one of them was saved? And the answer is both of them.
Right.
Even in the midst of doubt, the one who in an act of obedience and trust and faith and confidence in the Lord, even if he was still fearful, even if he was still afraid, even if there were hints of doubts, who put the blood and was marked by the blood of the Lamb, he was saved through this judgment the same way the other one was. Yeah. And I think similarly in death, when death is for some painful, difficult, hard, scary, God, His faithfulness even withstands that. That we don't have to think that in order for our salvation to be sure, we have to just smile at death's door. Right. No, that's not the case, I don't think, for most people. I think for most people, death is a time of sorrow, anguish, maybe even fear. But don't let that make you lose heart either, Christian. Yeah. The Lord will see you through this river, this river death, and on the other side is great joy. And that's encouraging. Absolutely. That was another scene. I think that and the martyrdom of faithful were the two scenes where I was like very, very moved. Yeah. Great book. I don't have very many bad things to say about the book.
No, not at all. I think that for everyone, there'll be moments where you'll kind of be confused. Might be words that you kind of go, I have to look up that word, and it's worth the work, but it's okay. Read it through and kind of let it wash over you and you see what comes of it. Yeah,
and actually, for anyone who's interested, there are also some study guides available for it, put out by a few different publishing companies and things like that. So if you want to be instructed as you're learning as well, also Ligonier, they put out a lecture series about the Pilgrim's Progress that talks about the book and talks about John Bunyan, his life, what some of the things represent. Actually, I learned some things from that lecture series that I was like, I I read the book, and I didn't really know what that was, but
Sure.
but they kind of explained it there,
Yeah.
and it was fascinating. So, yeah, really good book. I'm thankful to have read it. I didn't read it until like 3 years ago. I don't even think it was 4. I think it was 3 years ago. Me and some guys at church decided, hey, let's read this book together. It's like it's one of the greatest Christian books ever written.
Right.
Why have we not read it? And so we did, and man, it was a great thing to do.
I agree. All right. That sounds like we've about finished talking about the Pilgrim's Progress, because our goal is just to hopefully point to enough interesting things that you want to read it yourself. It's worth it. And so with that, this has been Empires of the Future.
And we'll see you in the future.